this has two main elements. First of all, an initial licensing process, which is administered by the national associations. So in our case, the FA of England, although they get the Premier League to do it for them. And that's basically, if you don't meet certain criteria, you can't play in UEFA's competitions. Once you get that license, UEFA itself then takes over and monitors how the club performs against certain criteria, one of which is the financial criteria. And I should mention, although we don't have time to go over it today, UEFA's approach has been copied by a number of other bodies in football. So at Everton, we're not only regulated by UEFA when we play in UEFA competitions, but we're regulated by the Premier League in its competitions, and the Premier League itself has introduced some financial regulations. But to go back to UEFA, the cornerstone of UEFA's approach is around the award of a licence. This is a quote from the Europa League regulations, which set out that to be able to participate in a competition, you have to fulfil certain criteria, one of which is your sporting performance qualifies you to play in that competition. So if you finish 5th, as we did last year, that qualifies you for the Europa League. But one of the criteria, as I mentioned, is also that you get a licence under the criteria that UEFA set, and you get it by a certain point. No licence, then it doesn't matter if you performed in the competition in the previous year, it doesn't matter if you won it the previous year, you can't play in the competition that year. And that's quite significant because of the revenue that's generated by European football. We all want to be playing in UEFA competitions. And finance is one aspect of the requirements for a licence. There are criteria around stadium, around off-field personnel, around coaching, around facilities. But finance is one of them. And just to illustrate how it works, one I wanted to just briefly focus on is the concept of overdue payables. Now, overdue payables are a bad thing if you're a football club, because what they are is basically another club owes you money for a transfer. Because a football transfer, although you read in the papers about an overall number, so 85 million for Gareth Bale, or 28 million for Romelu Lukaku, it's very rare in football that actually you pay that money in one instalment up front. Generally speaking, it's paid in several instalments. So if a club is, if you sell a player and they're not keeping up on these instalments, then that's a significant problem for you as a football club, because you factor in receiving that money. And UEFA quite correctly identified that there was a problem in European football, in particular, because in common with all football clubs, we are governed on certain aspects by the world governing body, FIFA. And because of that, if we were involved in an international transfer and we were owed money and we wanted to pursue someone for that money, the system that we had to use was the international system set up by FIFA, of the FIFA Dispute Resolution Chamber. Now, there's much to be said in an international game with a global footprint like football for an international system of dispute resolution. But the problem with the FIFA system was that, and is that it takes a very long time to get a decision out of the FIFA Dispute Resolution Chamber. It takes several years. And some clubs in some countries were taking advantage of that as a means effectively of extending their credit. So they knew they had to pay you on a certain date, but equally they knew that all you could do if they didn't pay you on a certain date was start a case at the FIFA Dispute Resolution Chamber, and it would take several years before you could get a judgment against them which you could enforce. So they knew they had a grace period of a couple of years. So UEFA took the approach of, they decided that they would make the level of your overdue payables part of your criteria, the criteria for getting a license to play in European competitions. And this is the basic way they do it. If you want to get a license to play in a UEFA competition, you have to prove that you don't owe any money to any other football clubs, and also the tax authorities. and it defines the concept of overdue payables, and I'll put the slide up there. Interestingly, the number of the main cases that there have been to date in European football about financial fair play have generally resolved around the concept of overdue payables and the what is and what isn't an overdue payable. And because it's a law conference, and as lawyers we all like reading cases, I've just thought I'd briefly mention 3 cases that there were at CAS. Firstly, involving a club called Bursaspor, which is a good example of the problems and the issues that UEFA was trying to address. They owed an English club, Portsmouth, €300,000. Portsmouth hadn't been paid, and there was a case ongoing and working its way through the FIFA system. But Bursaspor never really advanced any claim in its defence. So it wasn't a contested claim as such. There wasn't a dispute about whether it was owed, it just hadn't been paid. And Portsmouth were taking enforcement action through FIFA. And because Bursaspor never advanced any claim in its defence, even though the judgment was taking some time to resolve, UEFA, separately from FIFA, imposed under the financial fair play regulations a penalty on Bursaspor, who had acquired a licence to play in European football, of a 6-figure fine and a 1-year ban from European football, suspended for 3 years. Similarly, to